nutritionist, and she's the founder of the Complete Nutrition and Wellness. It's an integrative nutrition practice, and she's based in Hoboken, but she serves the entire country. And she was featured in Fitness and Elle and New York Times. She has a really fantastic podcast, which I really highly recommend all of you to subscribe to, Health Mysteries Solved. And she's the co-founder of Pregnaceuticals, which focuses on pregnant ladies and health nutrition for prenatal. I will also, I give some background to say that Ina, she didn't actually start, I think, as in nutrition, and Ina, you can tell us about it. She started with finance, I believe, but because of struggles she went through herself, she discovered nutrition, and ever since then, she's been helping all of us live life and enjoy life, but still, keep our health with that. So with that, I'm going to move the mic to Tzvia, who's the co-founder of Trajectory, who's hosting this beautiful Zoom. And thank you, Tzvia.
Thank you, Elaine, for the intro, and thank you, Ina, for joining us this afternoon. And thank you all the ladies and men who joined us to this really important discussion. So, as it started, I hope everyone had a very good week this week, as good as we can under the circumstances. And yes, it's getting warmer, so it always make everybody mood, I think, a little bit better. And we've been talking a lot about the COVID-19 and the implication of it. And I think there are things in the situation that we have very little control over. And there are things that we can do. And I think that's the purpose of the discussion with Ina, is to learn what we can do, what is in our control to actually help boost our immune system, get it better prepared to deal with the virus, and also to deal with those of us who've gone through treatment, chemotherapy, etc. How do we boost it to fight the disease and to get back as possible and recover our body from the trauma of the illness and of the disease and the side effects of the treatment. And of course, this is without not doing anything contradicting to the medical advice of our doctor. This should be complementary for us doing our treatment and continue with our regimes, but doing what's in our control that could be additional boost. So with that being said, Ina, I would love to hear your thoughts and guidelines as to what can we do to actually boost ourselves, strengthen ourselves physically and emotionally, by the way, dealing with the stress of COVID-19.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. Ellen, thank you so much for the very warm introduction, and so nice to meet all of you. And, it's, when we talk about our immune system, we really want to think of it from a holistic approach, because our immune system isn't this one thing, but it's different systems that all work together. And like you mentioned, it's really the stuff that we could do physiologically, but also stuff that we could do emotionally. And I think the first thing that we just want to make sure that we know is that there is an inverse relationship between stress and our immune system. And I think most people realize that, but I don't know if they really kind of quite understand it and really see what that connection is. But it's literally, our stress goes up, our immunity goes down. It's as simple as that. Now, why that happens is because of our stress hormones. So when we're under stress, and remember too, stress isn't necessarily just I have this problem, right? But it could be, just having certain worries, certain fears, even certain physical stressors like infections will count as stress. So it's a lot of different things. And when we're under stress, and again, it could be some people say, oh, I'm not really stressed, it's okay. But yet, they might be thinking a lot, and they have all of these thoughts that just go round and round. I mean, I think so, all of those will account for that. And then our cortisol, which is our stress hormone, is going to go up. And the thing is, we need cortisol. We can't live without cortisol, but it's a very delicate balance. You don't want to have too little, and you don't want to have too much. And actually, cortisol is supposed to cycle throughout the day. So in the morning when we wake up, our cortisol should be at its highest, but within a certain range. And that's when we should feel ideally energetic and ready to get up and, do what we do during the day. And then the cortisol is supposed to look almost like a ski slope curve, where it starts here and it sort of kind of goes down like this. And then in the evening, it should be at its lowest, but again, still within a certain range. And that should help us to feel more relaxed, more calm, and ready for bed. And then, again, the next day comes around and you do the other ski slope. What often happens though is, and I think it's confusing sometimes because you might hear commercials saying, oh yeah, high cortisol is this and high cortisol is that. It's not the total so much, but it's just having too much, but especially at the wrong times of the day. So we may be okay in the morning, then we might go down, but then often at night we'll get this spike. And people sometimes say I get a second wind or I can't sleep as well. And that's typically the first stage. And what happens there is when we have too much of it at the wrong time of day, cortisol is an inflammatory hormone. And when our body sees that, it literally thinks that there's an emergency. So if you think back to caveman times, being chased by a lion or a tiger, right, what's going to happen? Well, if we're being chased and we're in a true emergency, we go into what we call fight or flight, which is where our blood will actually go to our hands and our feet so we can either fight or run away from the threat. And then there's other things happen, like our blood actually coagulates. Why does it do that? Well, because if we're bitten by this tiger or bear or lion, right, if our blood is thicker, we won't bleed out. Our body also gets very acidic. It gets flooded with acid, again, because if we're bit into by this animal, we won't taste so good. So there's all of these things that happen physiologically, and it's more to protect you. Now, obviously, we don't live in the wilderness and we don't have tigers and lions running around, hopefully, where we live, right? But with that said, if we have stress, the body still reacts the same way. So that's really the reason why, right? So then we have this acid, and all the other pathways don't function. So the priority is to run away or to fight, right? So is dealing with an infection priority? No, right? Is digesting your food a priority? No. Is dealing with, like reproductive issues or anything like that, it's not a priority at all. So that's why those get put on a second burner or, may even become tertiary. And, so that's why there's that inverse relationship. So I feel like when we talk about immunity, of course, we're going to talk about food and nutrients, but we can't really talk about this topic without first discussing stress. So I think just the understanding of that is helpful for people, because then they realize, oh, wait a minute, like, because I think we often think, okay, what can I take? What medicine can I take? Or what vitamin can I take? What food can I eat? Not realizing that like all of those thoughts that we're creating can actually hurt us more than even the food or the medicine that we would take. And in terms of things that we can do there, I mean, there's so many wonderful things, and it's really about what works for you. I mean, I think first and foremost is really just thinking about some of the things that we enjoy. And sometimes I think we forget because we focus so much on, other people, whether it's our spouses or children's or work or whatever else. And we forget that, we have certain desires and wants. And I think doing things that you enjoy, and sometimes even just making a list of that, and thinking about, okay, well, what is it that maybe I like that I haven't done in a while, and spending 5-10 minutes a day and making that time, that's really going to help a lot with stress, because you're doing something for you. And that could be anything from drawing to taking a bath to talking to a friend. It could be something that's free or it costs money, just depending. But I like making that list so people actually see almost like a menu of what they like, because sometimes it's hard to think of it in a moment. And then once you have that, you can pick from that list. And then other things like journaling, singing, dancing, meditation, these are all wonderful things. Moving the body is good. And, when I talk about moving the body, I'm not talking about strenuous exercise. I mean, oftentimes as we go through treatment or post-treatment, we have to be really kind and gentle to ourselves. So, it's not about pushing the body, but movement. So if you're able to walk a lot, maybe just doing certain stretches with your arms and legs. If you're able to walk, maybe doing that for 5 or 10 minutes. If you're able to do more, that's great. But it's just getting that blood flowing. That's going to be really important. And then the other part of this, I think, is mindset. And, that is really paying attention to what it is that we're thinking about, almost like minding the mind, if you will. And, when it comes to that, I think if you think about what happens, right? We have obviously the COVID pandemic and all these things are going on, and people might say, well, I'm very scared, or I'm depressed, or I'm, whatever the emotion is. But I think we need to realize that the emotions that we feel are not created from the outside. COVID, yes, it's happening, but that's not what's making us scared or depressed or fearful or any of those things. Those emotions are created within us because there's certain people that may be in a similar position and they might be okay, whereas other ones aren't, right? So it's the way that we think. And so we really want to think about what is it that we're focusing on, because our focus is often what creates the emotions that we feel. So if we watch the news a lot and focus on all of the potential negative things, well, of course, that's going to create some negative emotions and fear, which is going to lead to stress. So sometimes it's helpful just to listen to your mind, because there is this voice that goes around. It's very quiet, well, sometimes a little louder, I guess, for certain people than others, but maybe even just taking like note of it and writing down, like, what are we saying to ourselves, but also what are we saying to others? What's our language? So how, maybe we're talking to a friend and we're saying, oh, I'm really scared. And the friend's like, oh, I'm really scared too. And then you go into, did you see this on the news? Did you see this on the news? Right. And then that whole conversation, half hour later, you talked about all of the things that you're nervous about, or all the potential bad things that can happen. Right. So it's basically things we're focusing on and saying internally, but also on the outside. And, the way to reverse that, I mean, obviously I'm not saying let's say something that's not true, right? I mean, if you're nervous, just saying to yourself, everything is good, I'm great. I mean, it's helpful, but it may not be true, right? If you're not feeling that way, we don't want to say something that isn't true. So instead, we want to think about how can we switch that focus, right? So one way to do that would be to think about, okay, well, what can I do right now? So like the minute you think, oh no, I'm really nervous, I don't know this is going on. If you think, well, what can I do right now in this moment? And that could be doing something you enjoy, or eating a good food, which we'll talk about in a second, or taking maybe a supplement if your doctor agrees. So then you're taking control back into your hands and doing something versus thinking, how scared you are or what can be done. And then again, being mindful of the conversations you have. If you're having a conversation, you see it go that way, realize that and maybe change the trajectory of that conversation. Those are helpful. Another good thing to maybe do in the moment, if you're in this like spiral, you could think about what you're grateful for. And I'm sure that this is probably something you guys have heard before. I know this isn't new, but I think it's a good reminder for all of us. When we're in gratitude, we can't be in fear. Those two emotions just don't happen at the same time. So just being, and sometimes people say, well, I don't feel, well, I'm not grateful for anything, but then go to some of the things that are there. Okay, maybe we don't have our health at 100%. I understand that. But, there's probably something that's going well, having food on the table, having a roof over your head, and you could go with the basics if that's all that you can think of, and that's okay. And that gratitude really creates a shift. So these are just some things that you guys can try. The other thing I would say is, for stress relieving techniques, if meditation is something that you are thinking about, I mean, I think it's a wonderful tool for stress relief. I know that it's something that's not easy for a lot of people. It wasn't easy for me, just because I do have an active mind. So people always say like, well, I can't stop thinking. How do you stop thinking? And I was the same way. I'm like, I can't stop thinking. It's not going to work. But what's interesting about that, I learned a method. It's actually through Ziva meditation. And there's a really great book. It's called Meditation for Extraordinary Performance by Emily Fletcher. She's actually a New York City-based meditation teacher, but she has this book where you can get all the information for $15 versus a really expensive in-person course, especially if you don't live in the area. And the way that she teaches meditation is that it's not about stopping your mind from thinking, because believe it or not, your brain is actually meant to think. But more so, it's about getting you to focus on something specific. And if thoughts come, you just go back to what you're focusing on. So typically a mantra or a word. And I know it sounds kind of simple, but it made such a big difference for me, because just like knowing that thoughts are not the enemy and that I don't have to stop thinking made such a huge difference. And so it was really helpful. And I've been using the technique and really getting a lot of benefit from meditation. So if it's something you wanted to try, but are nervous or think that it's too hard, this is definitely something that I recommend. So that's the stress part of it. Now, the other big part of it, and what we do have control over typically, is what we eat. And people always ask me, well, what supplement can I take, or what medication can I do? And, as a nutritionist, obviously I love those things, but food comes first. And I always say to people, you can take supplements until they're literally coming out of your nose. They're not going to do as much good until you have your food down. And I think that for our immune system, a couple of basics. So first, we want to make sure we balance our blood sugar. And the reason for that is actually, believe it or not, the stress component. So blood sugar dysregulation is actually one of the biggest physical stressors on the body. And like we were saying, stress is emotional, physical, right? The body doesn't know the difference. So when your blood sugar is going up and down and up and down, and it's not in line and not controlled, you're actually increasing your cortisol level and creating a lot of problems. So what does it mean to have balanced blood sugar? Well, first, we want to make sure that we're eating throughout the day and we're not skipping meals. And now there are some people who do intermittent fasting, and I know that there's definitely been some studies with, benefits of that. And I'm absolutely okay with that if it's something that your doctor agrees with and something you can do. But even with intermittent fasting, you're waiting longer to eat, right, from nighttime to later that morning, but then you're still eating regularly throughout the day. So what you don't want to do is you don't want to have a meal and then wait an hour and eat that. Now, obviously, if someone's going through treatment currently, there's going to be some things that would have to be adjusted just because of side effects and whatnot. But in general, we want to make sure that we're eating every 3 to 4 hours so that blood sugar doesn't dip. Now, in terms of what we eat, we have different food groups. So we have carbohydrates, we have proteins, we have fats. Carbohydrates are what raises blood sugar. And you guys may have heard that there's 2 different types of carbohydrates. There's good and bad. So the good carbohydrates raise it a little bit less because they're more complex and whole grain, whereas the good carbohydrates are going to raise your blood sugar. The bad carbohydrates are going to raise it more because those bad carbohydrates are going to be the processed things. So like the white breads and the white rice and some of the more processed stuff where there's no fiber or nutrients. So in an ideal world, we want to actually avoid those processed white carbs. I know that it's not possible all the time for everyone, just based on, what is available right now, but we do want to try to focus more on the whole grain carbs because we're going to get more nutrients and the blood sugar won't be spiked as much. However, we want to take this one step further. We know that white rice is bad, rice is a good carb. But people say, okay, great, I'll just eat a lot of brown rice. Well, not quite, right? Because it's still a carbohydrate, right? So eating 2 bowls of brown rice isn't going to be that healthy. So whenever you have carbohydrates, you really want to balance it with either a fat or a protein or both. And this way, our blood sugars stay more stable. So if you were to have, let's say, a half a cup or 3/4 of a cup of brown rice with maybe some grilled chicken and some avocado and some vegetables, that would be a balanced meal. Now, I know some people tend to be more plant-based, and there's some research with cancer and plant-based diets, and I think a lot of doctors do recommend eating less meat, which I'm all for. Now, again, it's very individual. I'm not saying everyone should or shouldn't do, but if you are more plant-based, then you'd want to make sure you have the fats to balance it. So you would have the brown rice with, say, the avocado and the vegetables and maybe some oils. And in that case, too, perhaps you may want to add a natural protein powder, like a plant-based protein or something like that throughout the day, just to get protein. If you're plant-based, sometimes it's a little bit hard to get. It's not impossible, but it can be hard to get enough protein. Sometimes when people are plant-based, they'll say, I'll just eat rice and beans. And there's certain health benefits of that, but rice is a carb, and believe it or not, beans are carbohydrates too. So they do have some protein in them, but beans usually have about 3 times as much carbohydrates in them as protein. So for a typical serving of beans, and this is really any beans, black beans, kidney beans, lentils, you name it, they're going to have about 24 grams of carbs and about 7 grams of protein. So pretty much, 3 to 1 ratio. And then when you combine rice and beans together, you're getting the carbs from the rice plus all the carbs from the beans. So yes, you're getting some protein, but it's way carb heavy. And so, if you're going to do that, have a little bit of that mixture and then have that with fat and vegetables, and that will make it balanced. I think in the morning, a lot of people struggle there because, a typical American breakfast is going to be cereal or muffins or bagels or orange juice, right? And so really try to make sure you have protein with all of your meals, but especially in the morning. So some of the things that I like to do in the morning would be, maybe a smoothie where you would use some fruit. And fruit also, by the way, it's very healthy, but fruits do have sugars. So we want to be mindful about how much fruit we use. If we make a smoothie and it has 5 cups of fruit in it, you're going to be getting close to 50 grams of sugar. And sugar is something that is it's a processed carb, and that's going to weaken the immune system. But if you do a cup of fruit and maybe 1 serving of protein powder, and again, if you're plant-based, you could do a plant-based protein. If you do eat animal protein, I really like collagen protein. It's nice because it's really natural. You can get like a good quality grass-fed collagen as long as your doctor is okay with it at any health food store. And a lot of times it doesn't have any flavorings or any other additives because we want to be careful with some of these excess components in foods. And then you blend that with the fruit and maybe a little bit of almond milk or coconut milk if you guys like that. You can use walnut milk or any other nut milks. And then maybe some avocado to make it creamy, or a nut butter if you don't have any nut allergies. And that makes for a really delicious smoothie, but it's also very balanced because it has the protein, so it keeps your blood sugar good, and then a few hours later, could be lunch where you would do a protein, a carb, a vegetable with some fat. Dinner could be similar. And then depending on how your day goes, so if you're an early riser or if you go to bed later, you may want to put in 1 or 2 snacks, because the goal is to try to eat every 3 to 4 hours so that you're not having these long stretches without food. And so, if your breakfast, let's say, is at 8 and your lunch is at 12, you could probably get away with that. But then if your dinner is not till 7:30, there's a big difference, a big amount of time, between 12:30 and 7:30 in the evening. And so a snack there would be great. Now with snacks, you want to be mindful of balancing that too, because I think, again, traditionally when we think of snacks, we think pretzels, chips, cookies, right? But you guys know, like, those are processed, they're going to be higher in sugar. It's not a good immune position to be in. So things like fruit are great, but again, fruit is still going to be sugar and still a carb. So I always tell people, if you have fruit, try to have it with a little bit of something that's a protein or fat. So have fruit with maybe some nuts or a nut butter if you don't have allergies to that. Or, if people are okay with dairy and if there's no issue there, maybe having a plain yogurt with some fruit, and you can have the fruit on the side or put the fruit in there. Or sometimes just doing something where it's 2 different foods, they don't necessarily have to go together, but something like a lettuce wrap, where you could take some organic, nitrate-free, hormone-free turkey slices, wrap that in lettuce with maybe a little avocado or some hummus, and then you can have the fruit as the side. So you have your protein, and then you have your carbs from the fruit. And it's just a nice way to have something that's a little savory, a little bit sweet, and it's balanced that way. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, so then in terms of actual foods, there's certain nutrients that are going to specifically be very good for our immune system. So those are things like vitamin C, vitamin D, and zinc. And we'll talk about nutrients in a second, but from a food perspective, foods that are going to be high in vitamin C are going to be a lot of the fruits, especially the citrus fruits, and then vegetables. So, things like broccoli, people don't think about it, but that's actually high in vitamin C. And what we want to try to do is we want to try to get as many different types of fruits and vegetables as we can. So we're eating the rainbow and we're getting those nutrients, and then we're getting that vitamin C. Zinc is also important. Now, zinc is found in whole grains and legumes. So, and again, you want to get enough of them, but you don't want to have too much where you're overdoing your carbs. But that would be good. And then vitamin D is another big immune nutrient, but vitamin D you really want to get the sun. And, if you live in the Northern Hemisphere, or, New York, New Jersey, where I'm here, it's really hard to get not hard, it's impossible, I should say, to get vitamin D in the winter. So even though the sun is out, it's not at the right latitude, so you can't absorb it. So you can really only absorb vitamin D here between about June and September. That's pretty much it. That's why so many people are so low on vitamin D. So in the winter, I think most people would probably need to supplement. There are foods that have vitamin D, like salmon, especially wild salmon, and there's certain dairy products that have vitamin D. The problem, though, is that dairy is typically fortified with vitamin D. It's not naturally occurring, and they fortify it with synthetic vitamin D, which is vitamin D2. So that's not going to be as good. Anything synthetic typically is not going to be as good as the natural. So now, again, depending on the treatments that you're going through and what the program your doctor has you on, there's certain supplements that may be allowed versus others that may not be allowed. But you do want to speak to your doctor about getting your vitamin D levels tested. Typically, the range is between 30 and 100 on a regular blood test. And what happens is that, if we want our immune system to be at its optimal, we really want to make sure that our Ds are in the middle of the range, right? So if the range is 30 to 100, being at 31 doesn't really make it sufficient, even though a lot of times the doctor will glance at it, nothing's going to be flagged, and they'll say, okay, you're fine. But, you want to be somewhere close to 50 or 60. And this is, especially for anyone that's dealing with any type of immune issue, be it cancer or be it autoimmunity, it's the same thing because there is an immune component to that. So I always like to aim for my patients to be in the 50s and 60s, sometimes even 70s. So check your recent blood test. Vitamin D is something that your doctor has probably tested, and see where you are. Now that we're getting into the warmer months, you should be able to get some from the sun. However, if your levels are really low, if you're at 20 or 25, just getting sun is probably not going to be enough. And vitamin D is just so essential. And what we've also seen with COVID, obviously everything's still very new and it's changing very quickly. But what we've seen with COVID is that, the dangerous part of that is where it progresses to the later stages. So, when people first have, the mild infection, but then when it goes into the second stages, that's where we get what we call cytokine storm, which is all these inflammatory things that attack the body. And that's where we can get into more trouble. But what we've seen, with some of these preliminary observations so far is that people with adequate levels of vitamin D they get to the second stage, but they have a less chance of getting to those later stages. Now, again, obviously, I can't recommend specific dosages because you do have to talk to your doctor, but look at your results and see. And I'll give you just some examples, for patients that I have, if someone is at 20, which is very, very low, because remember 30 is the bottom of the range, I typically have them on at least 5,000, because sometimes, if you're allowed, again, and speak to your doctor about that, because typically less than that is just not going to get it high enough. The other thing to remember is that vitamin D is a fat soluble vitamin. So what that means is that you need to make sure that you're breaking down your fat very well, or else you're not going to absorb it. And a lot of times, whether it's due to chemo or other treatments, or just due to immune deficiency, our fat digestion may not be as good. So for that, what we do is we would typically utilize a liquid vitamin D. And what we do with the liquid is going to be emulsified. So it almost becomes water soluble, if you will, from a fat soluble source. And it's much easier. And so then you'll be able to take less, maybe 3,000 to 4,000 IUs, which stands for international units, to get the levels up. Because I do have some patients that will take 10,000 in capsule, and we test their levels, and it's like it's not doing anything. It's not going up at all. And then, we see that it is a fat digestion issue. And typically with fat digestion, it's not like it's a major health problem, but sometimes our pancreas may be a little bit weaker. Not to say there's anything wrong with it, but it just might be a little sluggish. It may not produce enzymes as much. The other thing that's important is our liver produces bile, and bile is what emulsifies the fat. And oftentimes, any type of chemotherapy drugs, or, really any medications that we take are going to go through the liver to get detoxified. So that can sometimes create bile issues. It's temporary and it comes back, but there are certain nutrients, like bitters, for example, that are really good to thin out the bile. And so again, asking your doctor if that would be okay for you, but if you think there's any fat digestion type of issues, taking bitters and taking a liquid vitamin D is a great way to do that. Now, in terms of other nutrients, one of my favorite things is vitamin C. And what I love about vitamin C is that it's very, very safe. The problem when, we look at certain immune nutrients is a lot of them are herbal. And you guys may have heard of things like echinacea or elderberry or astragalus, and they're all very good, but they're herbal in nature. And depending on the person, sometimes those herbs can be overstimulating. And so whenever we have any immune issue, whether it's underimmunity or autoimmunity, there's typically two parts of the immune system. We have something called the Th1 and the Th2 side. And not to get too scientific, but basically, depending on how our immune system is doing, we might be more activated on one side than the other. And if that's the case, when we take immune stimulating herbs, the herbs can also have a dominant effect to one or the other side. So if you're already Th1 stimulant, right, and Th2 is down, and you take an herb that's a Th1 dominant herb, well, then you're doing this. And then you're creating stimulation for certain things, but not others. And, oftentimes, and not to say that it happens always, but oftentimes, when we have immune deficiency like cancer, they can also be some autoimmunity that goes along with it. And sometimes some of the medications can create that. So you just don't want to trigger a response if the immune system is already confused to attack your own body. And again, and I'm not saying that those herbs are bad, but I'm just saying that you do have to be more mindful. I think that people pop them like candy these days and don't realize that there can be certain correlations with that. But what's nice about vitamin C is typically vitamin C is safe for most people. It doesn't have this overactivation. It just has an overall boosting and supporting of the immune system. But also, it actually has some other benefits when there's a viral infection. It can work kind of like to encapsulate the virus in addition to raising your immune system without overstimulating it. Now, vitamin C is an antioxidant, so if you are going through treatment at the moment, typically antioxidants are going to be contraindicated during treatment because we want the chemo to attack the cancer. And if you take antioxidants, then that can offset that. But before or after treatment, if the doctor is okay with it, it's okay, typically. But again, you'd have to ask and see. And I usually recommend, again, everyone's different, but typically about 2,000 milligrams of vitamin C a day. But what I also talk about, and in terms of if you're already feeling that you're getting sick, you can actually dose your vitamin C a lot higher. And this is a protocol I've seen really great success with. And, I've worked with a bunch of people who've had COVID recently. Thankfully, everyone is totally fine and has not progressed to the later stages. And so what we do there is we do about 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C every hour. And we do that to bowel tolerance, meaning until you get diarrhea, which could be after 4 hours or 6 hours, and then you stop, and then you kind of go back and you do it for a few days. And that helps to saturate all of your cells with vitamin C, and it really, really helps a lot. Now, again, it's higher doses, so you do have to talk to your doctor to make sure that they're okay with some other medications you're on. But typically, it's something that, like I said, because it doesn't overstimulate, it tends to be fairly safe for most people. And then zinc is another important nutrient. And I find that so many people are deficient in zinc, and oysters are actually a really high food that's really high in zinc as well, in addition to the legumes. But if you're really low in zinc, it's sometimes hard to get enough zinc from food alone. I mean, you want to make sure you get that base, but if you're low in zinc, taking a zinc supplement can be helpful. Now, zinc also acts as an antioxidant. So if you're going through treatment, it may not be allowed, but afterwards, it's definitely good. And, what happens is that a lot of times the different treatments, as I was saying, they go through the liver, and then they can be really harsh on all of our organs and on the gut. And it could create leaky gut and, certain irritations in the gut. Zinc is very good for healing as well. So if your doctor is okay with it, that's something to ask. And that's great for both healing and the immune system. And then just dosages wise, again, everyone's different, but typically 30 milligrams of zinc is a good dose. I don't recommend going too much more than that because zinc and copper work as antagonists. So you can deplete your copper if you take too much zinc. But 30 milligrams for most people, you probably can't go wrong. And then the other thing is supporting the gut microbiome. And you guys may have heard that there's different bugs in the gut. We have good bugs and bad bugs. And the bugs are actually part of our immune system. 90% of our immune system is in our digestive system, believe it or not. So microbiome is key. Some ways you can do that is taking probiotics. That's typically something that I haven't seen be too contraindicated with different treatments. Again, depending on what you're doing, check with your doctor, but that's often okay. But in addition to taking probiotics, you want to make sure that you're diversifying your microbiome with the foods that you eat. And what helps diversify microbiome are going to be different plant fibers. And so one easy way to do that is if you get a bunch of different vegetables, and ideally you would get things you don't normally eat or they not like, and you would put them in a blender. You would cook some of them if they require cooking, others you could do raw, and put them on a blender, blend them together into this vegetable mash, and then have 2 tablespoons of that every morning. So even if there's vegetables that you don't like, I mean, it's 2 tablespoons. I think we can handle that, right? And by doing that, you're basically getting the plant fibers from all of those different plants that are going to help to create food and create a good environment for the bugs in your gut. And it's a very natural way. I can't imagine that any doctor would say no to that, because it's not a supplement, it's not, it's just food. But, it would be hard to eat all of those vegetables. And if they're mashed up and you do a little bit of all of them together, you get the best diversity. So that is really, really helpful. And then, I think other nutrients, I mean, there's obviously other things that are good for our immune system. But again, I think those really need to be individualized. And, some people are going to do better with it than others. But I think overall, eating a balanced diet that's high in antioxidants, and then specifically focusing on getting enough vitamin D, zinc, and vitamin C are the things that we can, generally all benefit from. And I have a question here. Hold on a second, let me see. Do you have to take both vitamin D and vitamin D3? So it's one thing. There's no such thing as just vitamin D and D3. Vitamin D comes in 2 forms. It comes in vitamin D2 form, and it comes in the vitamin D3 form. You do not want the vitamin D2. I mean, it's even hard to find these days because everyone kind of knows that it's not good and people don't really sell it. But like I said, some foods are fortified with D2, so you don't want those, like milk. But when you buy a supplement, you would want to look for vitamin D3, and most supplements, as long as you get them from a health food store or your doctor or nutritionist or a good place, not CVS or ShopRite, because they're not going to have the best brands there. But anything from a health food store is going to be a D3. And then in terms of dosage, we talked about that depends on your blood levels, but anywhere from 1 to 5,000 IU, sometimes more if your blood levels are very low.
So. Thank you so much, Ina. I mean, if there are any other questions, Marlene, you have a question? Yeah, just feel free to unmute yourself.
Okay, well, actually, thank you so much. That was really informative, and I think it was all really well done. My oncologist for years feels very strongly about B12, and B12 is not even milligrams, it's micrograms.
Correct.
So he suggests for me that a minimum of B12, 2,000 units of it, is very good. And actually, he tells me to almost take it midday. And the reason for that is it's like drinking, and I don't drink coffee, but it's like drinking a whole cup of coffee. Like, it really boosts your energy, it helps your head, and it makes you feel better. So that's the most minimum that people should take. And that's just not for cancer patients, it's for everybody.
So your question with that?
Well, I just wanted to hear what you had to say about that.
Okay. Well, so a couple of things. I didn't mention B12 only because it's not a specific immune one, but you're right. I mean, B12 is essential for a lot of other things, our nervous system, our blood, our energy. If you're deficient in B12, you are absolutely going to feel like you drank a cup of coffee after taking it, which is a good sign because you need that then. So it's now, is in this is a very complex thing that I think there's a lot more to it than that. So first, vitamin B12 comes in different forms. There's methylated B12, which is methylcobalamin, and then there is synthetic B12, which is in the form of cyanocobalamin. So typically you want to avoid the non-methylated cyanocobalamin form that can actually be toxic. And because it's not methylated, it can actually store in the body. And there's even, believe it or not, some correlations with certain cancers and the more aesthetic of it. You want to make sure you use the methylated. Now, also from the natural forms, there's 2 other forms. One is called adenosylcobalamin. The other one is called hydroxycobalamin. They're not methylated, but they're the non-synthetic form. So those 3 are okay. So methylcobalamin, hydroxycobalamin, and adenosylcobalamin. Now, in terms of who should take which, it's a little complex. So there are actually specific tests that can determine if you need one form more than the other, or if you can handle one form more than the other. The methylated is sort of the most natural that I think people are starting to understand more. The only, I would say, potential negative there is people can either be under methylators or over methylators. And so, and again, I know it's a little complex, but it's kind of a very important detoxification process. And so if someone is a over methylated, which I am actually, if I took 2,000 micrograms of B12, I would feel horrible in the methyl form. Now, more people are actually under methylators than over methylators. I think people are a little better and worse, but if you take it and you feel worse, that could be why. But ideally, you really want to work with someone that understands the nutrition aspect of that and understands, you know, the dosages. But in general, I would say yes. I mean, I think it's great, but 2,000 is pretty high. And if you've never taken B12, I wouldn't go that high if you don't know your methylation status. That's what I would say about that. Sorry, that might have been like more than what you wanted to know, but
that was great. That was great. And I didn't start at 2,000. I started at, 1,000.
Awesome.
So
great.
Yeah.
And then you can gauge, because a lot of times certain testing is not available or people can't get certain things. So you have to listen to your body. Because some people will say, well, my doctor told me to take this and I take it, but I don't feel well. And I'm like, well, maybe it's not good for you. They're like, no, but I was told to take that. I'm like, but your body knows better than anyone that tells you anything, right? So if you take something that doesn't work, and it may not be that, it could be the brand, it could be the type, right? But really listen to your body. That's most important.
Thank you.
Yes.
The question.
Sure.
Hi, Ina. My name is Yael. Thank you so much. You're so refreshing. Wow. Just to open the discussion about medicine with our soul is very refreshing. So thank you for reminding us that we are a little bit in control, a lot of control. I wanted to ask you something about vitamin C, because I was so happy that you said that it's my favorite supplement and I take it. But I wondered, I usually only take it when, fall starts and I feel like, oh, I'm getting my little throat. And do you recommend to take it all year or just really toward winter when we need the boost?
Yeah, great question. So I recommend taking it all year. I personally take it all year. Now, again, I mean, there's ways to test vitamin C and see where you are, but vitamin C is water soluble, meaning that your body uses what it needs, it gets rid of the rest. And, there's going to be times where, even if it's not winter, right, when there's not infections, but maybe when under more stress, your body utilizes C during times of stress, as actually it does B12 as well. So I think that it's, and again, I mean, you can eat an easy diet, unless everything is homegrown and organic, which is just not always possible. The nutrients in our food are not going to be what they used to be 100 years ago. So I think that most of our cells are not as saturated as they can be with vitamin C. And so I personally take it all year. And I think, again, if there is immune deficiency and there's already, a cancer diagnosis or, history of cancer, you want to make sure that your cells are not just adequate. You want them to be saturated with it, because we know that antioxidants are, and of course there's many mechanisms with cancer, but antioxidants are one of the things that help to fight it. And there are tests that could test for vitamin C specifically, they could test for overall antioxidant status, but I think that if you take 1,000 milligrams a day, that's not a super high dose. That could never hurt unless, again, your doctor has any specific contraindications. But other than that, it can't hurt. But it's also, additionally to your immune system, it's good, like I said, for stress. It's great for your skin, for your hair, for just overall health. So I would say yes.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Ina, I have a vitamin C question as well. I heard a rumor that for breast cancer patients that are on Tamoxi, they should not overdose with vitamin C because it has something to do with blood clotting. So I don't know if there's anything true on that rumor.
I don't think so. I mean, vitamin C, if anything, is going to be, I mean, it's not a blood thinner by any means, but really, really high doses could maybe have more of a thinning effect than a clotting effect of that. Now, again, I mean, would I recommend 10,000 milligrams every day on tamoxifen? No, just because whenever you're on a medication longer term, you still never really know how it reacts. You want to try to go with dosages that are going to be similar to what you can ideally get from food, so 500 to 1,000. Now, again, here's the thing. If you were to get sick, right, and if you're trying to prevent COVID and trying to make sure that, everything is good, if you take high dose vitamin C for the few days like we were talked about with the loading dose, that's not going to affect anything. I think it's more maybe high doses long term. But for a few days or just a little bit every day, because at the same time, right, that's kind of like saying, well, don't eat any foods that have vitamin C in it.
Yeah.
And that doesn't really make sense. I think the issue is more like if someone is on specific blood thinners like Coumadin or some of those medications, if anyone's ever had a blood clot or certain cardiovascular issues, those are major blood thinners. So then we have to be so careful with vitamins and even foods. People who are on Coumadin can't even eat leafy green vegetables because of the vitamin K content. But that would be different.
All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a question. This is Margaret in Tucson.
Hi, Margaret.
Do you know anything about something called Wellness Formula?
Is that a supplement or what?
It's supplemented. Yeah, it contains, and I wish I had thought to write this down ahead of time, but it contains a number of herbs and a lot of vitamin C, and it's something that I've gone to whenever I feel that scratchy thing in my throat. But I just wondered if you knew anything about it other than my experience.
So there's like thousands and thousands of different synergistic combinations of immune nutrients. It sounds like it's a combination of herbs and vitamin C. And again, those herbs are probably going to be things like echinacea and astragalus and some of the things I talked about. But as long as you feel better with it when you take it, then that's great. It's not something I would recommend long-term though, because I think with any of those herbs, aside from even that immune overactivation that we talked about, you don't want to take immune stimulating herbs all the time. Like that's why we said vitamin C is okay every day because it's not stimulating, but echinacea and any of those you would take as needed and then stop. If you take them long-term, you overstimulate and then it makes your immune system actually more lazy over time.
No, it's when you feel that scratch, you stop. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Ina, what about ashwagandha?
So that's a little different. Ashwagandha is an adaptogenic herb. So that's really more for the adrenals and stress. So that's not so much of an immune issue. Now, there are some people who have autoimmunity, like with Hashimoto's, that sometimes can be sensitive to adaptogens. And that's very much a case-by-case basis. But typically, most people are okay with that.
Okay. We have a couple more questions on the chat.
Okay.
I'm going to read them and then I'm going to post two really important links for everyone to use. One is for your fabulous podcast, Health Mystery Solved, and the other one for anyone who's interested with COVID and cancer to the Trajectories portal for COVID and cancer. So one question is, how do you feel about Oxalium?
Okay, so I'm assuming that that's probably the homeopathic one. It's like a really long word. I think this is the abbreviation of it, but it's like a long, yeah, and that's a homeopathic formula. I have not tried it personally. I definitely have a bunch of patients that have tried it and I've heard mixed reviews. Some people say it's amazing. As long as you take it at an onset, it really helps. Some people say it doesn't. Homeopathics are going to work a little bit differently, though they certainly can be powerful. I feel like it can't hurt typically at all. I'm just not sure it's going to be wrong to use that in combination with other things. Yeah, and then the question about the phytoestrogens and the plant protein, and I'm sorry, I should have clarified. When I talk about plant proteins, I don't mean soy. So I would mean things like rice protein, hemp protein, pea protein, that kind of stuff. I would not recommend soy for anyone that's had any history of breast cancer, uterine cancer, ovarian cancer, any kind of female cancers, or taking tamoxifen or anything like that.
There's one more question. Can you take ashwagandha daily? And also, can you take turmeric daily, from Kristen?
Yes and yes. So turmeric, I love. I think it's great. Now, again, just check with your doctor because it is an antioxidant, so you wouldn't want to do it probably with treatment, but afterwards, that's great. And the only, I would say, potential with that is from an energetic perspective and Chinese medicine perspective, turmeric is kind of a hot herb, so it has a lot of hot energy to it. So Like for me, for example, I don't know if you guys could see over Zoom, but I tend to have more redness in my skin. So when I take turmeric or ginger or things like that, I get more redness because I think I already have heat in my body. And from an energetic perspective, that's too much for me. So if you're noticing that, maybe just consider that. But overall, generally speaking, I think it's great and could do every day. Ashwagandha daily is fine as long as you're not feeling any overstimulation from that.
Right, do we have anything else?
Yes, another
here?
question I think which is important about improving the quality of sleep. What can help with that? I think it's also probably related to what you said at the beginning, a lot of stress
Yeah.
impact the quality of sleep. So what can
So, and I mean, and that's kind of a whole, and I actually have a bunch of sleep podcasts. If you check out, if you go to healthministries.com and just put in sleep, or insomnia, you will see that. I mean, because that's probably can take another hour to talk about, but yes, I mean, I think the stress and supporting that is important. If it's a cortisol issue, I like using phosphatidylserine, which helps to lower cortisol, and it helps with falling asleep, but also it helps if you wake up in the middle of the night, especially between the hours of 2 and 4 a.m. Because if you wake up during that time, that's either that there's high cortisol or the situation could be it's a liver issue. And again, not that anything is wrong with the liver, but it's just too many toxins that are processing through. So addressing that, that's going to be kind of individual. There's some general things, melatonin can help, but I don't typically recommend melatonin if you're under 45, just because your body will then get used to it. But if you're 45 or older or 50 or older, a lot of times we get melatonin depletion naturally because that happens with age. So it typically can't hurt and it can help. And as you take early enough, it's not going to cause that like sleep hangover in the morning. There's also certain herbs that are generally okay. Things like valerian root or passion flower, lemon balm, and there's formulas kind of like we were talking about, that wellness formula that has a bunch of things in it. There's formulas. There's one I use in the practice called Myosedate, and it has a lot of that in it. But if you go to the health food store, there's different ones that may say like natural sleep, might have melatonin and some of those things, so that can help. But sleep is essential, because if you're not getting good sleep, it's very hard to have a good, strong immune system. So that's important. But it's, I think there's a lot of areas that we would want to look at and try.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
What's the easiest way to like check in and get a good base for like what we need? I mean, I feel pretty healthy, but like learning that I shouldn't take herbs every day, that's new. I was taking astragalus every single day, and I didn't feel sick or anything. I just was taking it, and learning that was so helpful. Like, should I see a nutritionist or get a physical? Like, where can I get the blood work? What's the simplest way to kind of test my body? Because sometimes doctors don't know nutrition.
Yeah.
I don't want to go and waste my time. So what would you suggest?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So, and again, I mean, doctors have a very important job, and that is to make sure you don't die. I mean, it sounds kind of, but it's a very important job, right? So they're looking for problems, and they're looking to solve the problems when the problems happen. They're not looking at prevention. And again, it's not their fault. It's just how the medical system is set up, right? Especially when you see different specialists, they don't necessarily talk to other specialists. So like people are just kind of treating different parts of you. So the best way is really to see, and I wouldn't see a dietitian per se, because they just talk about food, but someone like a clinical nutritionist, which is what I do, or an integrative medical doctor who, integrative doctors who do functional medicine, which is what we do. You're looking at the body as a whole rather than just looking at different symptoms and trying to put a diagnosis together. And then the testing that you would do would be very specific blood work. I mean, if you go to get a physical, it's going to be, again, basic, make sure you're not dying. Obviously, but not going to look so much into like what else is going on, how can we improve, how can we prevent, how can we make our body the best that it can be. So, with functional medicine, we run different tests. Like, I mean, there's in-depth blood work, we do analysis through the hair, there's analysis through like saliva and urine to really see, almost like a blueprint of what's going on in the body, and look to see, okay, well, are you deficient in anything? But also, are you maybe have excess of something like heavy metals or other things that can affect it. And are your liver pathways working well? Because again, a lot of times in a basic physical, they check liver function to make sure your liver is not dying. Great, it's fine. But just because that's okay doesn't mean that it's actually functioning at its best capacity. So any type of functional medicine nutritionist or practitioner is going to be your best bet.
Okay, thank you.
And there's a lot of us out there. So it's, and a lot of people do it virtually. So it doesn't even have to be someone that lives in your city or area as well.
Thanks.
Okay, we have time for one last question because I'm very respectful of Ina's time. One last question around soy and women's health.
Okay, sorry, let me see.
So I've heard a lot about soy being bad for women if we had too much. Anything you would suggest about eating too much of it or any forms of it are not so good?
So I'm actually pretty anti-soy in general. I don't recommend soy for any of my patients, especially if there's any type of cancer. Soy is very estrogenic, and obviously after a certain age, estrogen may not be bad, but too much genetically a problem. And a lot of that is because our bodies can't detoxify the estrogen due to a lot of the other toxins and the things that we're exposed to. If you're going to have soy, you want to make sure that it's non-GMO at least. So at least it's the better quality, so organic, non-GMO. And if you're going to have it, I would say once a week. But if you have any history of any female cancers, I would definitely avoid that. I think there's a lot of other ways to get some of those nutrients and proteins. So I'm personally not a fan. Now, again, other people, there's going to be different opinions, but I'm basing that on just research, but also just practicing over the last 16 years and what I see in people's levels and what happens when they eat it, and then, testing them and seeing how they're processing it. And I just have not seen good things.
So just to add to that, my grandkids drank 3, they drank soy, but then now they drink almond or cashew milk. So is that a better thing to do?
Absolutely. So any nut milks, now again, as long as there's no nut allergy, so almond milk, cashew milk, there's walnut milk, there's oat milk, there's pea milk. There's like milk out of coconut milk, there's milk out of almost anything. There's even donkey milk, which I didn't know existed. I laughed out loud when I saw that, but there is. So yeah, all of those would be okay.
Thank you so much, Ina. Thank you so much, everyone, for the beautiful session. Ina, it was really, you covered everything in such a beautiful and detailed and clear way. Thank you so much for your time. And Ina's website and podcast is on the chat. And the Corona and COVID portal is on the chat. If any of you want more information about either, it's all there. And we will see you all next Friday. Thank you so much. Thank you,
Or Monday.
Thank you, Gail, for hosting.
Monday.
Bye.